I'm joined by Colin Horgan, and we're going to be talking about his game LUCAH, which is currently on Kickstarter. Thanks for talking with us today, Colin.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Jacob.
So, for people that don't know about LUCAH, can you give us a quick pitch of the game and kind of a elevator why they should be interested?
Yeah, so Luca is a nightmare action RPG about finding oneself that has some really stylish and tactical combat, but also mixed with this impressionistic horror influenced aesthetic and world that really, kind of draws you in and kind of puts you in this place of kind of unease, but still drives you through this really cool action adventure. I don't know, I'm getting excited talking about it, which is a good sign.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Let's talk about that art style off the bat
yeah.
because when I first found out about LUCAH, that's what drew me into the game.
Yeah.
I saw a tweet you put out just kind of late one night, and it's got this really, I have described it as raw kind of feel to the
Yeah.
art.
hmm
That's very angular, there's bright colors on a backdrop. What was the inspiration for this art style, and how did it develop?
Right. So this specific art style, the kind of like wireframe on a black background thing, kind of started a couple years ago when I was making some small games, and originally I came into game making as a programmer, right?
Mhm.
So like I drew like a long time ago, and I was really into art before like high school, and getting into college kind of took over my life and stamped out any creativity I had. So but I came into game making through the code side because I just wanted to be able to like make things move on a screen and all that. Like I found that really invigorating. But then after a few years of that, I wanted to kind of move on to more complicated projects that had visuals that weren't just all like placeholder like cubes or ripped from other video games. So I kind of settled on this like simple style of like what can I achieve by myself. And at first I like wanted to have some like simple animation with like some small sprites because I figured that was pretty doable. And at first when I was doing the animation, I would just kind of um, draw out like the outline
Mhm.
of the figures or whatever I was drawing, and I would put that in the game to test. And all my like prototypes are kind of on just like a black screen because I like it better than the like default Unity blue screen
Mm.
that it always opens with. And I was testing the game with like a little character that was just made out of a white outline, and I actually really liked how it looked. So I decided to just go forward with that. It's like I don't really need to fill this in. This works for the style. It's a cool aesthetic. And I've kind of stuck with it and iterated on it in a few games since. Like it showed up first, I think, in like a game I made 3 years ago called Comforting Sounds. Then moved on to a game jam game called I'm Not a Machine that started like a little blue figure, which kind of was the game that I iterated on to eventually come to Luca, which I like formally started developing last year.
Cool. The other part of LUCAH that really captured my attention
hmm
was the combat and some of
Yeah.
the elements of the combat that I think are really cool. The
hmm
first one was the concept of rewind. So for people that
Yeah.
haven't played LUCAH, you have this kind of consumable ability to
hmm
rewind an encounter back
Yeah.
to the beginning of it and try that out again.
hmm
Where did this come from?
Yeah, so if you follow me on Twitter or you've heard me talk at all about this game, you've heard me talk about how much I love Bayonetta, and that's a game that it's a very like strictly an action game, but it has a big focus on like style and cool looking moves, and it's rewarded in what they have as like a scoring system, right? And like at the end of every chapter, you get a trophy that's like a certain color based on like how good you did, with the highest being the pure platinum. So to get the pure platinum, though, like it has a very strict set of rules or guidelines that you need to follow. So you need to like score enough points by like doing these magnificent big combos during the fights, but also you have to never get hit and do it within a certain amount of time. So it's very stressful. It's a lot of pressure, but it kind of teaches you to play in a way that's like very, very cool, very flashy, and it was something that I really enjoyed. So I was trying to go through and like actually get these perfect platinums, but the thing was, as soon as you get hit once, like that's it. You gotta restart it, right? Or it doesn't count. So there was a lot of me like going into a fight, getting hit, going back to the menu, restart. And I
Right.
was just like, I wish there was a way to do this a lot quicker. I wish there was a button that would just like rewind the time. And then lo and behold, I was like, oh, that's a great idea. I'll put it into LUCAH and try it out. Um, it's been one of the more contentious mechanics in the game, which is interesting. Like some people really love it, and some people just don't get it, which is understandable. It's not really something that you see in a lot of games like this, and
Mm.
often, because like the game kind of takes a lot of like design hints from Dark Souls, and it's very like it has a stamina bar, so it's an easy comparison to make. People just assume it's like the SS flasks or whatever, especially because they get like restored at every save. But it's a bit more hardcore than an Estus flask or like a simple healing item, and something that I think is a lot more interesting and works a bit better thematically with what Luca's trying to do. Where like you're on edge, but you have to control that feeling of anxiety and play better, right? You can't just like
Mm.
absorb mistakes. You have to like, I mean, you absorb them in a way through knowledge where it's like, okay, like I know that this enemy does this now, and like I know how to get around it, but you still have to execute, right? You
Right.
can't just like get hit and then be like, all right, well that's one SS flask and I'm going to keep pounding. You have to actually like go through, and that kind of it's like similar in the idea that you have X amount of mistakes, but it's a bit harder to recover from them. You have to actually like learn a bit more from your mistakes, which I
Mm.
think is cool for this kind of game.
Yeah, I think it's very cool. It's kind
Yeah.
of akin to, instead of worrying about your use of consumables, you're kind of almost rationing your skill. And as
Yeah.
you play the game, it kind of evolves and you can use those in different ways.
Hmm.
The other thing that I thought opened up a lot of possibilities in the game is the mantra switching, the switching between
Yeah.
your builds, which you can do in this game on the fly. There's no cooldown on it. It's instantaneous.
Right.
Um, what was the thought behind this, and what were some of the challenges that you ran into in doing this mechanic that way?
Right. So the mantras are interesting because they weren't originally in the game at first. Like I wanted to just have a very simple like Zelda-like kind of thing where it's just
Mm.
like one weapon that you got used to. But as I got like more into like these like kind of like stylistic influences, I realized like having the different like they're essentially different weapons, right? And I thought that'd be interesting to have, and try to design ones that are all like of different uses, but distinguishable and like change up your style. That's something that a lot of the games, like I mentioned, Bayonetta does. It kind of goes all the way back to like the first like style fighter with like Devil May Cry, where you could switch between like guns and a sword like in real time, and that was like a big breakthrough. Something really cool that added to the style element. But also it adds a bit of like tactical thinking, like if you can design the different weapons around your like different enemy types as well, like which ones will work versus this. Like there's a long range one in the game. There's kind of like the basic like 3-hit combo one. Um, so but the challenges there, like the first challenge was just like making sure the mantras were distinguishable enough that you actually would want to use one over the other. Because I
Mm.
remember like a very like one of the first pieces of feedback was that like I added these three ones and basically the only difference was their range and like the animation was the same for all of them. And someone just said like they're all too similar, and I was like, that's right. So I just went on to create like different animation sets and like different properties. They all have different like charge attacks. Hopefully, like by the end of the game, there's like this beautiful array of like moves that you can use and take advantage of. It's actually the like bit of new stuff that I've been able to do while the Kickstarter campaign has been going is like just focus on building all that out. And I've actually like created a few recently that I think are really cool that will come up in the mid to late game and make the combat a bit more technical. But like the actual like technical challenge besides just like making them was making sure that you could actually like flow between the two that you have equipped at any one time. I want you to be able to like be like doing a combo in one and then switch over to another and like continue the combo in that set, because that opens up a lot of cool possibilities both for like the game looking cool but also like tactical or in-depth ones. Like you can
Mm.
use like a weaker but like less stamina heavy weapon to like go through the first few hits of a combo and then move to a finisher on like a heavy weapon, so that like you might not even be able to get to the attack with like the amount of stamina you have available, but you can because you did like the switch.
Mm.
And other things as well, because like some are better at other distances and maybe your spacing will change over the course of a fight. It just opens up a lot of cool strategic possibilities, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
So let's transition from talking about Luca to talking
yeah,
about your history. So
right.
what was it that got you involved in independent game development?
Yeah. Um, so I guess like my story goes back to like I decided I wanted to do games like towards the end of high school, um, because I started discovering some like cool games. Like indie games weren't like super big at the time. Like I think Braid just came out or was coming out, something like that.
Hmm.
And that was kind of like the big start of the indie explosion.
Sure.
But I discovered games like Killer 7 and Persona 3, Shadow of the Colossus, like on like the PS2, that were still like AAA games, but they were games that kind of showed that there's like a bit more out there, or like you can have interesting visions for games, interesting mechanics, or maybe even like have games that aren't just about fighting or whatever. So I thought that was cool. Even though I'm making a game that's just kind of mostly about fighting right now, but that's a bit different. Right. Uh, so that kind of got me interested. I took a programming class my last year of high school, and I found I was like pretty decent at it. Uh, and so like my path towards games was cemented at that point.
Hmm.
But then like the independent game stuff didn't really come until I guess like I was getting out of college, and I was looking at like all the like companies that made all the games that inspired me or that I liked. But the problem was like none of them are in the U.S. Or not a lot of them were, and I didn't really want to like move out of country to try to get a job and like have to learn a new language, all that stuff. So I had some friends who were that I made things with while I was in school, who were also interested in that kind of independent spirit and wanting to like continue working on the projects that we had. So that's when we decided, we would try to make the independent dream work at
Hmm.
some point. And we're still like relatively young. I'm still pretty young, just only like a few years out of college. But I feel like LUCAH is my first like real foray into trying to like make myself self-sustained independent developer outside of other jobs or contracts, or just
Hmm.
like owning something that's totally my own.
Cool.
Yeah, so that's my journey up to here.
Awesome. So you've mentioned some of the games that were inspirations
Yeah.
for Luca specifically. So like
hmm
Bayonetta, Dark Souls.
hmm
But what were some of the games that, as you were playing, really kind of gave you the inspiration to pursue game development?
Yeah, well, the first one, and I mentioned it in my last answer, was Persona 3, which
Mm.
was like I was in a time in my life where like I was too busy focusing on other things to really like play a lot of video games. I played a lot more when I was younger. I got Pokemon when I was like 5, and
Yeah.
I attributed that to like learning how to read and whatever. So like I go way back, but like it kind of dropped as like something that I actually enjoyed. Up until I was like halfway through high school, picked up Persona 3 because a friend said that it was cool or something, and it was really cheap. So I was like, okay, I'll try this out. And I tried it for a bit. It didn't really grab me, so I put it down. And then a couple months later, it was summer break, so I had a lot more time. So I picked it up
Mm.
again, and I was enthralled. And like part of what enthralled me was, it's like a fantasy Japanese role playing game about like fighting demons or whatever, but it's also part high school sim. And I found that like first of all, the high school sim was like nothing that I've ever played before, even though it's fairly similar to like a lot of like visual novels and things, which I just like didn't know about at that time. But I also found that it eventually became the part that I was way more interested in, as
Mm.
opposed to the more traditional like JRPG combat or whatever, and it like totally blew my mind. I was like, whoa, like games seem to be like such or like you can use games to create such interesting spaces for people and like communicate them in such a different way. And that's kind of something that I wanted to pursue at that point, especially because I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I was going to like push down a path where I'd become like a lawyer or a doctor or something, like have like a traditional like good job, and I was like, that doesn't really interest me. But the games do, especially because it allows me to engage with my creative side that I wasn't really getting to use much at that point. So yeah, that was basically it. Persona 3, and then I started looking at other things. Like I mentioned, Killer 7, Shadow of the Colossus. I also played very soon after that and really enjoyed those.
Cool.
Yeah.
Finally, we always like to ask developers what other indie teams or indie projects out there now have
hmm
really grasped their intention. So, what indie games that are in the works now are you most looking forward to or most
Right.
interested in?
Actually, this reminds me, I forgot to mention in the last answer, but I should always shout out um, Porpentine's game Armada. Just one of
Mm.
her few visual games. It's a like action adventure kind of in style Zelda, but like very glitchy and surreal. I love it. Was one of my big inspirations for like, oh, this is what indie games can do,
Mm.
or like the kind of indie games that I want to make. So I guess I could shut that out. Like it's free. People can play it in like an hour. Download it. Google it somewhere. But then for things, cool people who are doing things currently that I look to, I want to shout out Vextro, Vextro, Vextro.itch.io is where you can find their games. They have a cool game that I should have looked up the name of because I always forget if it's like In the Mouth of Silence or something like that. It has a very similar like kind of aesthetic to LUCAH, and it's how I like discovered their games. And it's like a side-scrolling poem, like horror story kind of thing. It's really
Oh,
cool.
cool.
And they've also been a big supporter of like LUCAH from its like early stages. So I want to share the love there. And then also someone else has been supporting me and makes really cool things is Faraway Times or Faraway Times. I'm not actually sure. That's the website, farawaytimes.com. Run by John Thayer. They're a really cool person, and they made a game recently called Kikai, which is a auto-scrolling grayscale shoot 'em up that's like really oppressive and hardcore, and a really fun little experience with good music. So yeah, those are my shout outs to other indies.
Well, Colin
Yeah.
Horgan, thanks for taking the time to talk to us and give us a little bit of insight, not only into your story, but into the development of LUCAH.
Yeah.
LUCAH is on Kickstarter right now. You can find more information in the description below and head on over to the Kickstarter page if this is something you would like to see happen.
Yes, thank you.